At MTN Business, we believe in growth. We started as a small business. Through hard work, dedication, and the need to connect with clients, employees, and potential partners, we built one of Africa's largest mobile networks. That's why we're committed to providing businesses with mobile and ICT solutions, no matter their size. Because we understand that every great business starts small. We did. And as South Africa's best network, we're dedicated to helping you grow your business network. Speak to our store consultants about MTN Business Solutions to grow your network. We got you. Everywhere you go, MTN.
Good evening, everybody, and a very warm welcome to. There I am. Good evening, everybody. A very warm welcome to all of you who are joining us this evening, and MTN Business as we start a new normal. But I think a conversation many of you have previously joined us in having, talking about business, how business converges with technology, and of course, how do we do what we have to do efficiently, sustainably, and with innovation. My name is Lynette Ntuli, and it's an absolute pleasure to join you and the team from MTN Business tonight as we really take digital transformation and what it demands from each of us and our businesses and the way we work and even the way now we have to meet into our own hands. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really excited tonight to just see so many of you join us online this evening. And I'm hoping that by vote of numbers, we're going to have not just an evening of sharing information and the opportunity for you to listen to a world-class speaker, but we're also going to hear quite significantly from all of you at home, just in terms of what you're experiencing. I'm looking forward to some of the juicy questions that you also have about how you're navigating a new normal. And more importantly, being an innovative platform and an interactive platform, I'm also looking forward to hearing some of the fresh ideas and innovation some of you have come up with during this period of great upheaval, but necessary transition. And of course, what I'm hoping will begin to evolve into a new future and a new way of being for all of us as we grow, as we evolve, as well as sustain our businesses. A little bit of housekeeping for this evening. We do have a question and answer slot open as part of our program a little bit later. But throughout the program, I'll be able to keep a live track of all of your questions, some of the comments that you'll be making on our chat here, as well as on social media. So my invitation to all of you as our guests is that if you do have a specific question, and you want to pose it to perhaps one of our speakers, if you can hit the chat box, simply use the initials rather, of the person that you would like to pose the question to. And then, of course, type out and write your question so that I'm also able to see and communicate some of those questions across. If we can also ask our audience at home as we go, there is a poll that will be coming up as well as part of this conversation. And I really hope that all of you will participate in that, because as I say, this program, the big transition in live events and these activations from MTN Business have always been driven by our audience's engagement and the energy in a room. But in a new room, we'd still love to know exactly what you're thinking. So please do participate in the poll section of tonight's conversation. Our speaker this evening, our main speaker at least this evening, is really looking forward to not only taking us on a bit of a journey, but also interacting with you. Because as we've spelt out in our introduction of tonight's topic and tonight's theme that's got all of you joining us, is that none of us are certain about what the future holds. But certainly, what we can do together tonight is begin a new journey, a fresh journey, and hold each other's hands as we navigate the unknown and begin, of course, to find new variables to do what we need to do. At this point in time, I would like to introduce Songezo. Songezo, ladies and gentlemen, is the acting general manager of the SME segment of MTN Business. And he, of course, this evening, ladies and gentlemen, is not only our host, but will also be spelling out for us what this new digital virtual normal means for the MTN business, what it also means with their interaction with the SME and business economy that they partner and also provide products for, but also what they would like to begin to hear back from all of us. And more importantly, how can we grow in this new virtual partnership that we are now walking together? Songezo, welcome, and over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Lynette. I really appreciate. Good evening, everyone, and a very warm yellow welcome to you all this evening. Thank you very much for taking your time out from your busy schedules, most importantly from family time, I must say, to join us this evening at our very first in what we hope will be a series of webinars aimed at informing and assisting South African SME business leaders in the future. For those that were not familiar with MTN Business, we are the enterprise business unit within MTN Group, in particularly within MTN South Africa. That's the business we represent today. MTN Business offers mobile and ICT solutions in cloud, in Internet of Things, security, managed networks across the three industry market segments, your corporates, your small, medium enterprises, as well as in the public sector. At MTN, we believe that everyone deserves the benefits of a modern, connected life. We believe that we can possibly change lives by improving digital access, driving financial inclusion, empowering and enabling SMEs, creating jobs, and facilitating broad community development, amongst other things. Moving to the reason as to why we're here this evening, we wanted to pose a question to all of you, or to all of us, in the room, in the market. What happens when life gets disrupted? And what impact does this have on our businesses? I'm sure that is a question that all of us have got, especially in the small, medium enterprises. And I think by far, in the corporates, in the public sector space, that's the same question that everyone is asking. It was only a short 3 months ago when we all were going about our business, and boom, the COVID-19 pandemic hit South Africa. And may I add that an unfortunate boom, I must say. I think all of you will agree with me. This unprecedented event in history and the resulting lockdown in South Africa changed our world forever. I'm sure we all agree on that. The SME sector has not been spared. In fact, I think you all agree that it has perhaps been the hardest hit because of this pandemic. The recent statistics South Africa survey found that 90% of SMEs have reported lower than usual turnover. And obviously that's a worrying fact. More than a third have said that they will or are already reducing their workforces. And of course, this is to get through the immediate impact of the lockdown. Unfortunately, a staggering 93% of businesses have indicated they will not survive the lockdown if it continues more than 3 months. And these are just some of the views that have come out in the market. In a sector where liquidity and cash flow are constant challenges, the ability to quickly adapt to the new normal can be the difference between absolute disaster and managing to navigate this and come out on the other side. This crisis is forcing our sector to rethink our business models, and I'm sure we can all agree that scenario planning is a critical skill that can help us manage the widespread uncertainty. As mentioned a bit earlier, at the core of our business is MTN's commitment to assist our SME customers, partner and collaborate however we can. We always look for ways to play a meaningful role in helping SMEs to navigate tough times during the course of doing our business. It is for this reason that we are hosting this webinar this evening. We are pleased to welcome globally respected scenario strategist and best-selling business author, Chantel Illbury, to unpack this vital topic for us. And of course, facilitating the conversation, as we all have heard this evening, is highly accomplished leading property entrepreneur, Lynette Ntuli. Thank you for making the time to assist us in being the service to the SME business leaders in getting behind this important conversation, to both Lynette as well as Chantel. We hope you'll enjoy this discussion and that it adds value in guiding you on navigating these trying times. And we also welcome your feedback and comments on the chat box, as Lynette has mentioned. And we certainly hope that you will really get value after taking your time to join us this evening. And I thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Songezo Masiso for those words of welcome to all of us. I think we can all agree, and certainly both as an entrepreneur as well as a consumer of the MTN brand, that what we've all looked for from the various goods and services that we all procure in our personal lives and even in our business lives during this particular period has been agility and flexibility, but more importantly, I guess, partnership. As opposed to just a purely transactional exchange, particularly given many of the challenges that we have all faced. Given distance, given the issues, of course, of not being able to be in our usual retail environments, our usual business environments, and in the spaces, of course, that we interact with those service providers. So it's great to know that MTN is saying to all of us, let's journey and let's journey differently, but let's also, of course, still work towards a familiar and similarly minded future. Now, ladies and gentlemen, for many of you in this last period, you've probably looked at the strategy that you set off with at the beginning of 2020 and thought, what will I do with this strategy now? Do I review it? Do I throw it out and start again? Is this my business 2.0? And we all know that, strategy for so many of us doesn't only guide the way, but often tells the story of our aspirations as well as the ambitions that we all hold dear to the work that we do, as well as some of the businesses that we are building. In so many ways, strategy helps us unpack so much of the impact and the value that we want to put out into the world. But for many entrepreneurs, it also gives us the opportunity at the beginning of a new year to stop, to think, to take in hindsight what happened in a prior year, to take in what our data is beginning to tell us based on what we saw, the results perhaps that we drew, and draw some important insights into our business successes and failures. And then, of course, devising those strategies begin to create a new vision and foresight for where we are going. But it seems with this great event, this Black Swan event that we find ourselves in today, that not even the best data, not the best analytics, introspection, observation, or choices seem to be helping us to reach a concrete end to both the transition and a transition, of course, into the new normal, or even helping us manage the stability of some of the decisions and the actions that we have to make. Every day, there's a new piece of news, a new indicator, a new metric, a new evolution in all of the sectors that we're working in that requires us to not only think differently or react and respond differently, but even in many instances to do differently. And then many of you aren't just moving on your own, but you're moving with teams, with clients, with suppliers. And so many of the people who are responsible for making sure that we have a pulsing and vibrant economy. Songezo opened about the challenges that particularly the SME business sector faces in our country today. And certainly yesterday, after listening to the budget speech, we came away feeling like, when will business confidence be fully restored? When will the economy settle down and we can begin to make perhaps more stable decisions? When will? There were still so many when wills in spite of those adjustments. Well, I'm delighted then tonight that we're going to be in conversation with somebody who has helped clients around the world, big and small, figure out the great questions of when will, what will, who will, and where will. And joining us from Cape Town tonight, we have Chantel Illbury. Chantel Illbury is a world-renowned scenario strategist and facilitator, as well as an author. And many of you may have already read her books or experienced her educational training seminars, Mind of a Fox, perhaps being the one that immediately comes to mind for so many of you, as well as the Growing Foxes training division of her business. Chantel uses scenarios, helping us answer the easy and the hard questions to guide corporate teams, organizations, and businesses through strategic conversations, particularly in times like this. And I can't wait to hear what she has to say about this period in time that we all, for the very first time, find ourselves in. We faced world wars, we've faced economic meltdowns, 2008 perhaps being the most recent one. The world has faced natural disasters, but never has, in at least our century of existence, has anybody lived through a biological crisis, an unseen enemy, no start or end date to its existence and its perils. And of course, I guess the questions and some of the volatility that we are facing are certainly far bigger than they would be under just normal economic instabilities or other volatile situations. I'm really looking forward to her helping us through the big questions, but also helping us wayfind through our own thinking processes and our own design around certain solutions that we have to come up with as we get through 2020. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a welcome to Chantel Illbury. Chantel? Hi, Chantel. Ladies and gentlemen, we're just resolving the sound from Chantel's side at the moment. I can also see some of the questions. Elon is asking us if we can plug our companies into the chat. If they do have the RSVP link, Elon, please do ask them to join us this evening. I know some people have also asked us about if this recording will be available later. It will indeed. And of course, I'm reminding all of you to please hit the polls. Our questions are up, and I'd love to see some of your answers and thoughts come up on that as well.
Hello? Oh, am I back?
There you are, you're back.
Okay, the sound, I can't hear you very well, but if you can hear and see me, I'm going to get going.
Please begin, Chantal.
We can hear you,
Hear
Chantal.
you.
Lovely, thank you. Thank you very much, everyone, and sorry about that. Apologies, technology. Not sure what happened, but Lynette, and very good analysis of the future, and the fact that this pandemic has just hit us, and 3 months ago we were saying, all right, well, what's 2020, or nearly 5 months ago now, what's 2020 going to bring? And interestingly enough, a lot of businesses, I did a session at the end of last year, and we said, we don't think 2020 is going to shoot the lights out in terms of growth for any businesses, especially in South Africa, in terms of our economic climate at the end of last year. But what we were saying is 2020 is a year to position yourself. So it's about thinking strategically, it's about positioning yourself, it's about looking at the next 10 years, 2020 to 2030, a lot of change, technology coming into play in the next 10 years. What effect will that have on business, and how do we position ourselves and think strategically so that we can be successful into the next 10 years? And then, of course, who would have thought that the pandemic then came into play, which added really a further uncertainty on a very uncertain environment, but in actual fact, an uncertainty that many people actually have not been able to deal with. Some people not being able to deal with it because they are uncomfortable in uncertainty. So strategically, it's become very reactive type of strategy that is coming into play. And for some people, they're in the trenches and they can't even look out and say, well, what is the future actually look like? So I've titled this called Thinking the Future. And it's about saying, we know what's happened. We have many uncertainties that we have to deal with. And how do we take a 12 view or an 18-month view? And I think what we also had in terms of our normal strategies is we would build a 3-year or a 5-year strategy, and then we would start the implementation phase. Whereas now I think what we've realized, 3 to 5 years is far too far in advance. I think I heard in the beginning, some businesses said that if there's a lockdown for a further 3 months, they won't be in business. So we have to bring our time frame a lot closer and say, let's deal with the uncertainty. Let's give ourselves a framework for thinking and be able to maneuver the next 12 to 18 months. And I just want to put one thing into play for small and medium businesses. And it's something I work very closely with a gentleman called Clem Santa, and we really are of the view, in an economic sense for South Africa, economic growth will come from small, medium businesses. It won't come from the big businesses. So I know it feels at times for a small business or a medium-sized business, I don't think I can survive. I'm not going to be able to get through this. But if you are very strategic and you give yourself a framework for some thinking, the future for South African economic growth is going to come from small and medium businesses. So I just wanted to put that thinking into play. So just to give you that framework, and yes, we use scenarios all the time in our thinking. In actual fact, we always use scenarios. We have done for the last 20 years. We are of the view that the future is always uncertain to a certain degree. So therefore, we can't see a single projected future, which is something like a hedgehog would look at a single projected future and then build a strategy. And then when something comes in from the sides, they then become very reactive. So we have always said, think like a fox, think about the future through a set of thought out scenarios so that you can give yourself some agility and adaptability to actually maneuver if something comes into play. So, of course, we had Earth BC, which was before COVID, which seems like a lifetime ago. And then, as we said, it's only a few months ago. But if you think about the global environment, it was uncertain before the epidemic, first of all, when it was in China, and we thought it might be an epidemic and it might be contained. And then we realized with the mobility of people and other things at play, it then became a pandemic. And so then we actually started to say, well, Earth AC, which is after COVID, and what do we need to think of? So one of the things we must remember is the pandemic is a health challenge. And in actual fact, it is invisible to a point. So therefore, our anxiety around it and our ability to deal with it strategically actually is a little bit unknown. And we might be looking back in a couple of years' time and saying, who thought of putting a strategy in place of a lockdown? And, you know, China was the first that put a lockdown in. And of course, they're a country that can orchestrate a lockdown, and they have quite a compliant citizenry that would comply with the lockdown. But then the rest of the world, Europe started to do it, and the US to a point, the UK, South Africa went into a very aggressive lockdown. And of course, all economies are at a different position. They were at a very different context in January and February going into lockdowns. And so for some, it's actually been incredibly detrimental, of course, South Africa being one of those. So how do you actually think about the future, and how do you give yourself that ability to think strategically in such uncertainty? So you really have to look through a number of different frames or lenses. You have to understand the global environment. Even if you're a very small business that's operating purely, maybe only even one province in South Africa, you might not even be a national business, but you certainly have to understand the global environment, because it will play into different industries, and it will also play into the South African context. Then you have to take it into a South African context and understand our national dynamics, our national challenges, and what some of the things are in South Africa. And then you have to look, because industries have been hit. So what are the different industries that have been hit by this pandemic, and which ones are going to come out of it looking pretty much the same, a bit battered and bruised, and which ones are going to come out of it looking completely different in the next 12 to 18 months. And then you would go down to your own company, because you've actually had to say, well, how does my company and all the business units and the departments, how do we actually work from home in a lockdown? When we come back, how do we look at social distancing, sanitizing? And then what's become very evident in business as well is around individuals and people. So the HR, human resource function, fundamentally is actually going to have to think differently about people in the future, the way we work, and some things are going to hold and become permanent in terms of the way we work differently, and how people's well-being and balance between work and other issues come into play. So I think that there's going to be fundamental change in the human resource space around people. So if you look at it, the industries that have been impacted, and I've only put a few of them, of course there are, many more industries, but I've tried to collectively look and say definitely tourism. So if you're a small or medium business in the tourism sector, you are absolutely nodding your heads, because, access to destination is now zero. So tourism and leisure, aviation, we've seen, if you go down the line, construction industry, though, before the pandemic was under stress. And even if you look at our big 5 or big 4 construction industries, a lot of them were already going into business rescue. So construction has been under stress for a number of years, and of course this hasn't helped. Looking at infrastructure as one of the things that we can move with going forward, and I know that they are in South Africa looking at a number of infrastructure projects. But again, we have been promised infrastructure projects for quite a number of years. Manufacturing, and then we start to get down to some that have been affected but are still able to operate to a point. I'll come back to education just now, but agriculture has operated, although again, it's got some different dynamics. And then we start going into the IT and the MTNs and the Vodacoms and you know, any other business in the technology space have certainly come to the fore in different ways and in different spaces. And then medical, you know, as an industry has certainly come to the fore. So the question is, you know, what are those industries going to look like into the future, and where is the opportunity going forward? And as a small or medium business, where are you? So we haven't got a poll on this, but I would like to just ask the question, if you would like to put on the chat room, just what industry you are actually in. Would be very interesting to hear on this webinar which industry you're in, and you know what it means for you in the next 12 to 18 months. So if you want to just go into the chat room and say what industry you're in, fabulous. And in the meantime, I'm going to just continue. So based on different industries that have been affected, we can actually now pull it out and start to say, well, what are some of the uncertainties that are starting to come into play? And from an external perspective, you know, we've got job losses, and we're not sure the extent of the job losses. We've had some that actually started to happen during the lockdown period. We're now in sort of at the moment a level 3, maybe moving into level 2 of the lockdown. But even beyond lockdown, what job losses are we going to start seeing in the next 3 months, 6 months, 12 months? And again, we would question productivity going into the future, because not only social distancing, manufacturing, the way we do things, mining sector, also in terms of the fact that we are all on webinars and working from home, and different types of productivity. Economic recovery in the South African context is of key concern and is a very big uncertainty. Health and the link between lives and livelihoods is certainly a tightrope that we're walking on. The political will and also the political capacity to deal with all the complexities that this pandemic, on top of a number of other uncertainties, has brought. 3 that I've put in the box that I think are interesting. We're certainly going to see types of industries post-COVID surviving, thriving, and some that are actually going to be new industries that are going to come into play. And I think customer behavior is going to be different. So it might not even be, if you're in the tourism sector, that customers or consumers will go back directly to the type of tourism that we offer in South Africa. So we might see different experiences they're looking for, maybe more outdoors, maybe making sure protocols and safety are in place, understanding international visitors coming in, etc. Retail, exactly the same. So customer behavior is a key uncertainty, and we need to think about it, what changes will take place. And then I've just said internally, in terms of business, I think overall in terms of businesses, not only business models would you have to look at to see what is going to hold. Do you have to change your product range? Do you have to change whereabouts you are in the value chain? What sort of things are going to overlap into the future that were quite siloed or individual? And I think just the future world of work, the workplace, and the 4th industrial revolution. So again, technology was always coming into play, and we knew that we had to change, but I think that the pandemic has been a catalyst, certainly for the technology space. And I think in a sense, if we have a look at technology, we're not only looking at it from the internet, webinar, the way we communicate, the way we have meetings, the way we work from home, work together. Industries such as the mining sector, I think, will now be looking at mechanization. Manufacturing will be looking at more automation. And where before in South Africa, we also had the dynamic saying we don't want job losses because of technology, we are not going to be able to hold on to that for much longer. So I think technology is definitely going to come into play. So we're going to have different types of skills that will be required, or skill sets. And we are certainly going to have different types of jobs, not necessarily job losses, but different types of jobs due to technology. So I do have a poll here. And on that poll, I do want to just ask one question. And the question is, do you think that technology will be a game changer for your business post-COVID-19? And I've already seen on the poll that we've got 90% are saying yes, and only 9% are saying no. So already we're taking an uncertainty actually into a certainty. So you're already starting to say, I know I need to deal with it. And if I'm not in the technology space or up to speed, I'm going to have a problem. So I'd like to then take us just to the global, and I don't want to spend too long on the global because I want to bring it closer to home. But I just want to say we need to understand that global environment. It's the top frame that you actually have to see. And there are certain flags that are playing out in the global environment, even before number 7, the pandemic flag. So religious flag is at play, and there I would just highlight something like Iran and the US and Iran sanctions at the moment. The US, even in the pandemic, are trying to put stronger sanctions on Iran. Iran is trying to push back. So we have tensions there. The red flag, which is Russia. Russia has caused some tensions. There are sanctions on Russia from the US and Europe. We've got China and we've got North Korea that still is in play, and it does come up and down in terms of its nuclear arsenal. We've got the grey flag, we've got an aging flag. So we've got Japan, we've got Europe that for many years have actually not seen good growth. And because they've got aging citizens, they're going to see slow growth for many years in time to come. The anti-establishment flag definitely is up. And I think even something like the Black Lives Matter movement starting to take hold is really an example of an anti-establishment flag. The environmental green flag is still at play. So we're going to have environmental issues that are coming into play. Interestingly enough, with the environmental flag on the short term, things like the plastics industry, I do a lot of work in the plastics industry, and it's starting at this moment in time, people are saying, I'm not so worried about buying things in plastic. I'd rather look at what is the cost of it. So economics are almost trumping environmental issues and sustainability at this moment in time. Whether it will hold or whether sustainability issues will come back into play further down the line, the next 12 months, 18 months, I'm not sure. National debt flag, we've had countries with high levels of national debt, and we've got the US with a debt of 26 trillion. We've got the UK going over 100% debt to GDP ratio, South Africa going up. So before the pandemic. So we need to keep an eye on that. And then, of course, we've got the pandemic on top of that. So if you were to look at the world in the next 12 to 18 months through a set of scenarios, we've got 4 scenarios. A growth scenario, which is new balls, please, which we give, Clem and I give a probability of about 10%. So we're not going into a global growth scenario in the next 12 to 18 months. Hard time scenario where we still one world and go into a global recession. Could do, but I don't think we're seeing much around the one world. I think we're moving far more into the bottom end, which is a more divided world. So the question then is, are we going to have a fork lightning where we have a global recession in a much more divided world? And that's due to very high national debt levels and economic collapse due to the lockdowns and some of the stimulus packages that have been put in? Or are we going to go to a UV, which is a 2-speed scenario? So some countries stay in a U, very low, slow growth, and then a couple of them manage to walk that tightrope and start to get their economies going again. We could be looking at China, perhaps the US. Donald Trump going into an election in November is certainly saying that our economy will be going again, in which case we're going to be moving into a divided world, but with different levels of economic growth. So if we sit there, I just wanted to put two things. There are two pulls. One is the economic collapse. And on the other side, the thing that is pulling us into future growth, maybe not in the next 12 to 18 months, but the rapid uptake of new technology. And that could ultimately be the game changer in terms of shifting us in the 12 to 18 months towards a new growth scenario. And things like renewable energy, etc., could actually start to come into play, which would take us into growth and away from oil and fossil fuels. So just flags to watch. So how do you play this into the South African scenarios? Again, you would hold your global scenarios, then you'd say, right, what's happening? What are the scenarios in South Africa for the next 18 months? Now, as small, medium businesses, this is very critical for you. Social cohesion is one of our key uncertainties at the moment. And what I'm meaning by social cohesion, it's the relationship between government and business, government and business and society. And if we start partnering and collaborating and working together, especially with this pandemic, since the pandemic has hit us, we're going to have high levels of social cohesion. And then we're going to only be looking at our economic climate. Is it really going to be negative? And we did hear the emergency budget speech yesterday. Are we moving further into economic decline, or are we going to start moving towards some a more positive economic climate? In South Africa's sense, it won't be a V. We won't, in the next 6 months, probably be starting to go back up and see a lot of growth. It will be more U. It will be slower growth and low growth for a while, a couple of years probably. But if we're starting to flag towards that, it opens up opportunity. So South Africa, best case scenario in Nkosi Sikelel Africa, an inclusive economy, structural reforms, small, medium businesses being key players in job creation and getting economies going, partnering between big business and small business in terms of their relationship, public-private partnerships. That is the scenario in Nkosi Sikelel. The Solidarity Fund is really, when we went into the lockdown, our social cohesion was fairly high. Everybody came to the party, and the government has put a stimulus package in, private sector has put money in. So overall, the scenario is called Solidarity Fund, but economic climate's negative, so it's not a sustainable scenario. We can't keep putting money in without it stimulating economic growth. So if we end up there and we can't stimulate economic growth, we're going to start moving down in our scenario to lower social cohesion, more tension between all the different players, negative economic climate, and we're going to start moving into a free fall scenario. So the current position for South Africa is between Solidarity Fund and free fall. So it's a critical strategic moment for South Africa. If we do, however, move towards some positive economic growth, and some of the flags show us that, what we do want to be careful of, the cautionary tale, is that we don't move into that bottom right-hand, mind the gap, because that's going back to big business owning the economy, small businesses not being able to come into play. And we're going to lose our opportunity to go to an inclusive economy. So mind the gap is probably a cautionary tale, and we don't want to very quickly get back into that type of scenario and actually shade out all of the small and medium businesses that we're starting to try and bring on board. So those are the scenarios for South Africa. There are some flags, if you look on the right, duration of the lockdown, I think, is still a critical, how much is opening up. I see we've now started to open up our hairdressers. I actually went to the hairdresser today. It was great fun. Degree of collaboration between business and government is a flag that we really have to watch, because trust between business and government has to be built so that we can form this partnership, so that South Africa can get its structural reform and start moving towards our best case scenario. The quality of communication from the government is a flag, mainly because levels of anxiety, when you don't know what's happening or you get miscommunication or contradictory communication, our levels of anxiety go up. And then, of course, I think something to watch is the degree of collaboration between political parties. I think we have got the ANC, who are the government. I think we just need to flag what's happening within the ANC, their internal challenges. And I think we need to look at the ANC, the DA, the EFF, and it's not a time really for politics to come into play when we're trying to get our economy back into Nkosi Sikelel. So I think that we actually need to watch for that. So before I continue, I just wanted to put another poll into play, because we're sitting as small, medium businesses. This is the scenarios, this is the environment for the next 12 to 18 months that we've got to look at. And on top of that, we've got a workforce that perhaps in terms of productivity, we're not sure with the flag of the duration of the lockdown when we can get going or when we can't. So I wanted to ask another poll question, just to say what percentage of your workforce will actually work from home post COVID-19, so that you can start to say, are you starting to see a different type of work setup? Okay, so I've given it 10, 15 seconds. And at the moment, we're sitting with about a 30% are saying 0 to 10% of your workforce. Only 5% saying 40 to 50% of the workforce. And I think that's just something interesting that you should be thinking about, because some of the businesses that I've worked with, big businesses and some of the small and medium businesses, is starting to look at the knowledge economy and the type of skills required. And in some industries, there's been a shortage of skills, especially if they're specialized skills. But because we can work through technology now, you could perhaps start to think of being able to attract from not only South Africa, you might have a greater pool into the future to look at in terms of when technology allows you to work in this way, you could start to look at different skills. So I just wanted to put some of that thinking into play for you. All right, so we've got global scenarios we're watching carefully. We've got the South African scenarios that are dependent on what happens if we go into a global recession in terms of our economic growth, and then we've got our challenges. So as a small, medium business, you need to watch these scenarios all the time over the next 12 months. Every time you get a piece of information, you say, what does it mean? Is it holding? Is it going to take me to this scenario? If it's a free fall scenario, what does it mean for me and the type of industry and business that I'm in? And how long will that hold? So then I want to just give you a piece of a framework to actually work through. How do you hook all of this information on, and how do you think about all these complexities? So again, I had another poll question that I wanted to just ask you very quickly. And that poll question was, let me have a look here. How long will it take your industry or business to recover? Will it take 1 month, 3 months, 6 months? Sure. And what I'm seeing at the moment is about 70% are saying it's going to take 12 months, 1 year for your business to recover. 4% have said 1 month. So what you're saying there is that you're not going to get back to business to the levels that you were at, or to even look at growth based on your previous levels for a little while to come. So that means you're going to have to be more nuanced in your strategy. You're going to have to be very clever and think like a fox. Watch those scenarios, look at the flags, think what it means for you, and then put some of your decisions into play. Don't knee-jerk your decisions. So I'm going to give you a framework now, which I would like to say, thinking the future, this is kind of the framework that you should be working with, or I think you should be. It's what Clem and I work with all the time. So I'm conscious of time, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but really 6 people have said different things underpinning your thinking. Peer whack, take the blinkers off when you're looking at the next 12 to 18 months. See what's happening on the periphery that could become core, and don't be too narrow-minded in your thinking. Think like a fox versus a hedgehog. Charles Darwin, be adaptable. Sustainability is those that are able to adapt and evolve. Karl Popper, look at some of the flags which are clocks. They're ticking. You know what they're going to do. Some of the flags are cloudy. We don't know how they're going to play out, so work with some scenarios. When you're making decisions, be careful. David Hume says reason is the slave of passion. Do not make decisions based on emotion, especially now. Rather look at those decisions more pragmatically, understand what's happening, see if you can manage to continue to the next point in time. And then Socrates, a life of question, 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 question. And so that's why this is my main piece of framework, that as small and medium businesses, I would like to leave this framework with you, and you can continue and put it into your own thinking from tomorrow if you would like. And there are 5 pillars of strategic thinking that you should be working with all the time. Awareness. You need to be absolutely aware of what is happening. So that means you have to contextualize your own business. And once you've contextualized it in the South African context, if that's, your geography, then scope it and say, what am I doing? Where am I? What is my scope of my business? Do I have to change the scope of my business, or can I keep it the same? Do I have to diversify some of my revenue streams, or do I have to try and solidify and make sure I focus on them? Who are the players? I have to watch government all the time. I have to watch my consumers. I have to hear what regulators are saying. I have to listen to the media. So who are the players that I need to think about and how they're playing? And then you move to intelligence. For the next 12 to 18 months, what are the rules of the game? What are the certainties? If there are some certainties in your environment in the next 12 months, if you're in retail and you know that online is now taking traction, so you're going to have online retail that's going to sit alongside face-to-face physical retail. That is the new rule of the game. That's a certainty. What are the key uncertainties that are actually facing you? How are you going to cope with those uncertainties? And it's there, those few uncertainties, that you need to build into your own scenarios. So you'll watch the South African scenarios, but then you'll build your own scenarios and say, what does that mean for me? These are my scenarios. Yes, my scenario says that my industry, I'm in the tourism sector, but maybe they'll open up in September. We might be able to do this. How can I think differently? There's another scenario that says tourism will only open up in February next year. February next year, that scenario means I'm out of business if I can't do something different until then. So build your own set of scenarios and then start to make decisions. Have an ethical compass because, you know, is it moral and legal, especially in these times, morality? What are your options and what are your decisions? Then make those decisions, be incremental with them, see the consequences of them, and take on the next piece of the decision. And then I think it's very important, sit back and reflect for a minute and say, well, what is my meaning of winning? It might just be, I want to still be in business in 12 months' time. It might be as simple as that. But it might be that I want to have changed and grown my customer base or my market share, or I'm innovative. What for you as a small business or a medium business is your meaning of winning? And once you've then got that, you can backtrack and now keep monitoring. Am I getting to this meaning of winning? And I think it's a very important time at the moment in this context to step back and say, let me rethink. I was heading off. Let me now, I've got a moment in time to rethink. What do I need to do? And I think that if you've got this framework and you work with this framework all the time and hook the pieces of your puzzle into it, it gives meaning and it allows you to be more in control of what you actually need to do. So for me, that is the presentation, and I'm sure that Lynette has got questions, but my final dynamic world, it's a changing world, and you have to be a dynamic thinker. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Chantel, for that hugely insightful presentation. And thank you very much to our audience for also responding to the poll results. I think, Chantel, for me, the very first kick off question that I would have for you, just having watched how the scenarios are working out, one of the greatest limitations that we have in our economy today relates to data. And when I talk about data, not just connectivity, but up to the minute relevant information to help us make decisions. And, you know, many of the businesses that I saw listed from our viewers at home come predominantly from sectors that are very service driven, very customer driven, immediate cash exchange, cash on demand type of businesses. And with that, it means really a lot of their data is actually aggregated in their day-to-day activities. Now, it would appear from what you're also saying to us is that we really can't rely on what we knew before. And we've now got to think of this new future that we've got to delve into. How then do we create and start to think around scenarios and almost zero basing a lot of our targets and our projections in our businesses, given some of the historical discrepancies that we have of information, but now moving into a space where we haven't even done enough business to pilot what's going to happen from a transactional value perspective or how our customers can respond in order for us to make those type of management decisions. How do we get around that?
Such a good question. And, data is very important. So, we work on data and we actually analyze and synthesize data and say, what does it mean for us? But I think it's a moment in time that we've got to go back to that data and say what we thought it meant in the past might fundamentally be different into the future. And I think for some businesses that have not gathered enough data, if I'm hearing what your question is, in some ways, it's quite good because we are taking out some of the legacy and saying, well, let's start from a zero base and let's think the future and build it. So there are things that we could let go and we should be letting go, and now's the time. And I think for me, the process is what they call this minimal viable product. And they do it in technology when they're building a platform. They say, what's the minimal thing that I can do that gives me a functionality so that I can move on. And then as you see how that uptake of functionality is, you move the minimal viable product to the next piece, and you incrementally build, because you're starting from scratch. So you can't do everything and try and change a whole big thing at the same time. So I would suggest you work with the concept of minimal viable product, try it out, see where it takes, expand it, put more bells and whistles, put something else onto it, shift it a little bit, is my advice.
Thank you very much for that response. One of the questions that we've also got just from our chat box this evening has come through is, in what way can business better collaborate? Because certainly we're going to see new models of being come out, and be in a big competitive edge is how we're going to work together. Maybe Chantel and Songezo, you can also participate in that answer, because quite a number of businesses are asking about the issues around creating partnerships for scale, as well as how to collaborate with both their customers but also their own ecosystem.
Songezo, would you like to start that, or do you want me to?
You can maybe start until I'll probably add.
Okay, so the question is, how do you work together? How do large companies and small companies work together? So one of the things I do think is that if we were to go with something like an economic CODESA that people are talking about, so we all get together and we start to say, well, how do we now need to work together? I think that if we think it's going to be a top-down government approach for an economic CODESA, I don't think we're going to get it right. It has to be bottom-up. So for me, I would go as far as saying within a region, within KZN, bigger businesses, smaller businesses, townships should be sitting together and having a CODESA and building those partnerships and where they can work together, and then do it maybe in, the Western Cape, and do it, and then that bottom-up approach, because I don't think we're going to see any relationship starting in that direction. I don't know if that helps to answer.
Thank you, Chantel. Songezo, please continue.
Thanks, Lynette. And just to add on what Chantel was saying, probably is the best route to take in trying to eat this in small chunks, because certainly it becomes difficult sometimes to engage with the bigger corporate as a small medium enterprise to try and foster that relationship. And therefore, region by region, I attempt to support that. I mean, in our case as MTN business, how we are structured. We're structured in such a way that as much as there is head office, which is based up in Johannesburg at 14th Avenue, Roodepoort, we also have regional structures. So within the regional structures, we represent the regional structures are fully representative of the whole organization, from MTN business to the consumer business to the technology business. So there could very well be SMEs that are in the technology space that could then foster relationships within a particular region. And yes, we do have a responsibility as an organization to work with small medium enterprises as much as possible, because obviously it assists the economy, and that we then contribute in job creation, as I've indicated in my intro. So I think I tend to support that, but that's one element. But in the other element, on the other side, there could be small medium enterprises amongst us today that are in the ICT space. And we also have programs within MTN business that are what we call the partnership. There's a partnership program that we have that we are running. I'm happy to share details around that a bit later. People are welcome to email me. And what that partnership talks about is about we can enter into an agreement with small medium enterprises and be able to co-create products. That's number one. So depending on the small medium enterprise got an innovation on a technology product, we can co-create the product or productize that SME's product into our product set. The other way of doing it is that we can actually go to market together. in a form of partnership. And that we run within our partnership space within MTN Business. Those are some of the ways that we probably can do it. But I'm happy then to engage further with each individual SME should they be interested.
Thank you very much to both Chantel and Songeza for those responses. Chantel, we've got a question as well that just talks about how do we balance the economic development goals of a developing nation like our own, as well as now these new environmental needs and sustainability needs, really, that are also going to be highlighted by this, by the future we now face, really, and by this transition that the pandemic has thrust us into. How do we balance the two? Because what we've generally seen is that if there must be economic development, there's often an environmental loss. And yet the two now are very big and competing priorities at this point in time.
So I think the environmental issue is not going to go away. So if we compete with the economy at the expense of the environmental, I think we're going to have a short-term play as a country, and then we're going to lose our competitiveness and slip down the global competitiveness pretty quickly. So I think that it would be very short-term to not balance the two, because globally I think environmental issues have now started to take hold. Even when you start to see on, the stock exchange and equities and investors, they're starting to say, we're starting to look at investing in companies that have the sustainability piece to it. Sustainability, both in environmental and the social sustainability in terms of prosperity. So I think, unfortunately, we are going to, even as a developmental state, have to balance those two things together in order to be sustainable into the future. And perhaps that's where businesses are going to have to come on board with their own environmental issues and costs to play into that. And just a word on that as well. And if anybody wants to go on, you go on IMD Competitiveness Yearbook, and they rank the top 63 countries. And the rankings go up and down. It's a very important ranking, because competitiveness implies that you are becoming more prosperous as a nation. And if not, what are the challenges? And one of the key things in terms of that ranking that's starting to take into account are environmental, because that's a sustainability. So if you want to be competitive, you have to take the environmental issues, and it's our peril if we don't. Yeah.
A final question whilst we are on the issues of environmental perils, and it's also coming through from our chat box to say, where after this big transition, where typically economic growth in our country has been found in the 5 major metros, we're also possibly now going to see the dispersion almost of economic activity and the growth of new economic hubs in our country. We've already touched a little bit on the informal economy, the township economy, and getting that ground up approach in terms of how collaboration and competitiveness can be better fostered within our economy post-pandemic period. With that, that environmental change, as it were, in South Africa, do you see new hubs coming into play, also bringing with them new players, new industry activities, innovation in products? And I guess on the tail end of your answer, Chantel, and one perhaps to throw forward to Songezo, is to then say, Songezo, how do MTN Business see themselves, assisting businesses in those peri-urban areas, in those rural areas, in those previously unserviced and underserviced areas, integrate into this digital economy that we're now moving rapidly into?
Okay, so I'll give one little take, and it's a difficult question, and that's exactly what has to happen in terms of an inclusive and a concept, because again, when you sit with just the big metros, you're starting to get mega cities. And megacities have their own dynamics that actually, come into play. So one wants to be able to spatially work your economy. And the only thing I can say on that as well, there are some things I know have been thought about, how soon. We're not talking 12 to 18 months. But for example, the AXA, the airports company, they're looking at the Garden Route as being a hub, actually, with new innovation and new things coming into play. They're looking in sort of the Uppington area as being a hub for different types of businesses and resource-based. And that will bring a whole lot of things into play. So I think that's one of the ways that you can get those hubs going. Is it a resource-based hub? Is it a services or a tourism-based hub? And what can you build there so that you're pulling, Cape Town becomes the Western Cape that you're looking at. And, Durban becomes up the coast and inland. And I think they're trying to do that with the Dubai, trade port, etc. So I do think that the hubs are a very good idea. And I think there's some thinking, but, when it'll come in, I'm not sure. But yeah.
Very much, Chantel. Songezo, if you can also just add the point around how do you support these new hubs, new business. I know we've also got a few questions already from your customers who are asking about, with work at home, how do I improve my infrastructure, manage the efficiencies of cost and productivity as well at home? Maybe if you could also converge that into your response.
All right. Let me try, Lynette. Thank you very much. I think the first part, if I understood you correctly, was about digital inclusion. Obviously, looking into the rural areas, areas that are in the far flung. So I think the first part linked to our belief as MTN that everyone deserves the benefits of a modern connected life. I believe that we truly live that as an organization, and that if you look at 4G coverage in the country, we cover now 94% of the population. That's the first thing, and hence then as an organization we've been voted then as number one in terms of the network quality, and obviously how far our network has gone for the past 3 years or so. Or it really links to that. But I think straight to your point, how do we support the hubs? One of the things that I think we do well is that we try our best to get involved in the communities where the hubs live. And I'm going to take this back to our regionalization of the organization. Because what we actually have done with our regionalization of the organization is that we've actually created, I can call it mini MTNs within each and every region. So each and every region has got a general manager that leads that region. So to speak, a CEO of MTN for a particular region or particular province. And then we've empowered those individuals to actually make decisions because they are closer to the communities where the hubs live or where the people live. So that's one of the things. So we empower the people. One, whenever there are network opportunities, in the sense that there's an area that is not included in the digital space, the region can then make quicker decision to be able to deploy network infrastructure in that particular area and be able to support schools in that particular area. I mean, it makes me think of a recent initiative that we had, particularly in the Eastern Cape, where we're actually connecting school kids with tablets. Almost about 79,000 of them, where they will be basically learning over tablet, from home, driven by the Department of Education in the Eastern Cape. And obviously, that is one of the impacts. We believe that's one of the things that we're actually doing, and that's an MTN business initiative to try and obviously bridge that digital divide. And we know how rural, for example, the Eastern Cape is. And therefore, those are some of the things that will contribute into that. And I think the last one I just want to add is that one of the products we've just recently launched, which is mobile money, Momo. I think it's one of the the products that are going to come into our areas to bridge the digital divide, because then we are trying to tap into the what we call the unbanked market to be able to bank in a more digital way. And it's not about a money transfer. There are a lot of services that were actually added on the platform, things like buying electricity, and recently things like you can actually renew your car, your vehicle license using Momo, the Momo platform, using the mobile money app, and sitting in your home, and the actual license will actually be delivered. And I think those are some of the ways that we're trying to bridge the digital divide. So no more it's about you need to be in the city to be able to access such services. The services can come to you via the digital means.
May I just add one thing, Lynette? Sorry, just to that on the education, and I said I'd come back to that. What we have realized now, and it will definitely be, going back to schools, but online education and even in the higher education space is going to be something critical that we actually have to leapfrog. And so access to internet and broadband, and that should be the one key priority that we put in for the country.
Thank you for raising that final point, actually, Chantel, because I think it links so well to what Songezo was also just talking about, because we do also need to start saying what are the new levers of productivity. And within that conversation, as we also start thinking about how we're going to redesign, evolve our businesses, as well as even just evolve how our economy, our communities, and technology works around us. I think it also opens us to now starting to think about just those type of questions, localized products, how we use capacity, how we use technology, and more importantly, how we take available intelligence and available transactions and we build on that experience. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of our session this evening. Looking at, of course, how we build scenarios and we think around and navigate the new business unusual, but also the new social normal that as South Africans we're trying to all find our feet within the context of. To those of you who are asking us for the presentation, yes, it will be available after this presentation and the link. Please do also follow the MTN Business and the MTN South Africa social media links, and those clips and outtakes will also be available there too. To those of you who are also asking for the contact details of the team, we will make sure that the pinned post, the final post, is also made available. And we do, of course, appreciate the many questions that are still coming through. And I know the production team has promised to say that once they have picked and aggregated some of those questions, they will make sure that the MTN business team is able to respond to you, because by registering, you did also register some form of a contact detail. Thank you to all of you for taking your time this evening to join myself, Chantel Illbury, and Songezo Masiso from MTN Business this evening. It was an absolute pleasure to hear from you, to hear about the sectors that you're involved in, your thoughts, your ideas, and some of the challenges that you face. And I certainly hope that some of the answers that you've heard tonight will enable you to start again to refresh some of the things that you may be doing, and maybe think differently around some of the challenges that you might have had to sleep on tonight. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful evening to all of you.